Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Plutarch begins his treatise, How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend, by quoting Plato on the matter of self-love and our capacity to actually know ourselves well. So he says that Plato says that everyone grants forgiveness to the person who avows they dearly love themselves, but he also says, along with many other faults which are engendered, the most serious is that this makes it difficult or impossible to judge yourself in the right way. And the words here are dikaion, to be a just judge of yourself. You're more likely going to, make excuses for your own bad behavior and probably be unduly judgy about other people's. And to be an unbiased, uk adekiston, right? So to not welcome, not make, again, excuses or what would we say, exceptions for oneself. It's difficult to do this for any person. Why? Well, because we love ourselves. So he says, love is blind towards the beloved unless you've done something. And what is that? Through study, which is mathesis, acquiring the habit of respecting and pursuing what is honorable, what is intrinsically good, rather than what is familiar to you or what is coming naturally to you. So unless you've undergone some course of moral self-scrutiny and improvement, you're probably going to have the wrong sort of viewpoint on yourself. Now, why is that a problem? Because, as he says, our self-love, and the word for that in Greek is philautia, right? Our loving our own self, our being friends to ourselves, you might say, if you want to think about the phile part of it. It gives flatterers, the kolaks, the person who the treatise is actually about, a place to work from. It's translated here, I like this, a wide field within the realm of friendship and an excellent base of operations against us. So it allows the flatterer to appear to be a friend, to exploit, we could say, the expectations and resources of this feature of our lives that we call friendship, by exploiting the very love that we have for ourselves. So that's a problem. And now, how does that actually work? Well, Plutarch goes on to say that it's because of this self-love that everybody is to themselves, right? So there's this reflexive relation there. His own, it's translated here, foremost and greatest flatterer. But I think we could actually be a little bit more literal. We are our first proton, could be foremost, but our first flatterer. We flatter ourselves before these other people come in and start flattering us. And our greatest, megistos, our largest, our most comprehensive flatterers. And so because we're already flattering ourselves, he says it's no problem then for the flatterer to come in and to witness with us and confirm our own conceits, our own opinions about ourselves, and our desires. And, what are these desires? Well, we want to think of ourselves as better people than we are. We want to think that we're possessed of qualities that we don't actually have. So if somebody else comes along and says, yeah, you actually do have those qualities, ignore what other people are saying. Oh, ignore your own modesty about yourself. You're a great person in all these respects. Our self-love gets us to say, oh, yeah, maybe they know me better than I know myself. Maybe I should listen to them because it feels good, the sort of things that they're saying. Now, Plutarch points out a big problem for this, or caused by this, right? He says that the desire to have good qualities is not unnatural, but the idea, the conceit, the oasis, the thinking about ourselves that we actually do have them, that is actually dangerous and we should avoid it. Why? Well, he says, the flatterer takes a position against the Delphic maxim, know thyself. Know who you actually are. Understand the kind of person that you are. How? By creating in each person deception, and this could be also translated as cheating, apate, right? So it comes from a term that is used for like deceiving, cheating, fleecing somebody of something. We deceive ourselves. The flatterer plays a role in it, but they get us to do that. And so deception towards ourselves and ignorance of our own self as well, right? So that agnoion, right? That's a problem right there. And in what ways? Ignorance of ourself, but also of the good and the bad, or good things and bad things that concern ourselves. So, just to take an example, because he's not providing one here, if I am, flattering a student who's not doing well, and I'm saying, oh yeah, your papers are so insightful, right? They're not going to develop because they think that I'm already doing great. This person is giving me praise for my work. I mean, I don't see it myself, but they must know it. And so then they're not going to put in the time and work to become a better thinker or writer, right? And being a good thinker is a good for yourself. Being a bad thinker, a bad for yourself. So the good and evil that concerns themselves, and more practically, the good that they render defective and incomplete, and the evil wholly impossible to amend. Without criticism, the right kind of criticism, which we'll talk about elsewhere, you can't actually make progress, whether it's in technical abilities, whether it's in knowledge itself, whether it's in your moral life and your relationships. So that is a big problem. The next feature that Plutarch is going to talk about, he says that, you do have flattery at a low level, right? Everybody thinks good of themselves, but where you really got to watch out is when you are working at a higher level. He says that flattery it makes itself a stumbling block and pestilence in great houses and great affairs. It goes after who? Well, ambitious, philotimia. That can be a good thing or a bad thing in Greek, ambition, but it goes after people who really want to do something. And then beneficial, Christos, people who are good to other people, people who are advantageous to other people, right? And people who are decent in their character, epiekes. Flattery goes after them in particular. So if you've got anything like that, or you'd like to think of yourself in that way, you really need to be on guard against flattery. And he goes on and he says at a couple different points, this is why we need to understand flattery. So he says, it's no small task to subject flattery to examination. Why? Being thoroughly exposed, it may be prevented from injuring or discrediting friendship, right? So friendship itself can be brought into, disrepute or damaged by flattery. But a little bit later, he's going to say again, we really need to learn how to detect the flatterer. Why? Otherwise, we're in the same case as those who try to learn about deadly drugs by tasting them first. Don't learn by experience. I mean, you can learn by experience. Learn by observing other people's bad experiences, or if somebody's happened to write a text about this, read their text, because that will help you to avoid the injury that comes from flattery, to which we are all vulnerable. Now, he gives us a bit of advice later on in the treatise. In addition to talking about many of the tricks that flatterers use, which is quite important, he tells us something about human psychology or human nature. So this is coming from, Plato, or essentially Plato's ideas passed down through the Middle Platonists like Plutarch, and he says that one mode of protection for ourselves, of guarding ourselves, philautia, is to realize and to remember, gignoskein kai mnemnomenuein, right? Always, i.e., that our soul has two parts to it. Now, you might say, wait a second, I've read Plato. I know that the soul actually has three parts. Yes, but if you also read other parts of Plato, you'll see him talking about there being a rational part, the highest part, and then there's the irrational part, the alogike part, right, which has two subparts, the thumatic part, the part that gets riled up, that strives after honor and self-respect, and then the part that is concerned with the appetites, right, which is actually quite multiple itself. So we got two main parts, and we need to remind ourselves of that, rather than thinking we're all good. So he says, on the one side, we have truthfulness, alethinon, right? It's coming from the word for truth, and love for what is noble, what is honorable, philokalon, and the part that has rationality, the part that has reason. He translated here as the power to reason. The other part is different. It's alogon. It doesn't have rationality, although it does have reasoning processes, right? It has inferences. And unfortunately, it's attracted to lies or falsehood, including lies about how great a person you are, right? So, philopseudes. And it's the more emotional side of ourselves, pathetikon, the part concerned with the pathe. Now, who's going to favor which side? The friend, the philos, will actually benefit the good side of ourselves and try to promote it. He says the friend is always found on the better side as a counsel and advocate, trying like a physician to foster the growth of what is sound and to preserve it. What does the flatterer do? The flatterer encourages this irrational lower part of ourself, and he says that he tries to divorce it from the reasoning powers by contriving for it diverse low forms of pleasurable enjoyment. Right? The flatterer's talk adds nothing to the thinking and reasoning powers, but promotes familiarity with some amorous pleasure. The flatterer is the one who's like, hey man, go enjoy yourself. Go have sex with that person over there. It doesn't matter that, they're attached to somebody or you're involved with somebody. You got to get what you can get, right? Or what else? Intensifies a foolish fit of temper, anger. They encourage us to be angry with people. You shouldn't put up with that. Not somebody like you. You put them in their place, right? And we could go on and on. He talks about provoking envy, engendering an offensive and insane bulk of conceit, commiserates in distress, or causes malice, illiberality, and distrust to grow bitter, timorous, and suspicious. So the flatterer is going to, focus on the worst side of ourselves and make us, if we're not careful, into worse persons. So what's a remedy for this? Plutarch says, it's not surprising that people have a self-conceit, a self-opinion about the most noble qualities, the kalista, the things that are the best, right? We all would like to think of ourselves that way. We all desire to actually have those things, even though we don't necessarily have them. This gives the flatterer, as he says, boldness and confidence. And the terms that he's going to use there are, basically the same thing. Tharsos, the side of ourselves that feels bold, right? So it opens up, the possibility for the flatterer, as we saw earlier, to get in on this. And he says, okay, so I gave you this advice earlier. I'm going to give it to you again. What do we need to do? Root out, ekkoptein. We need to pull out, like, weeds in a garden, our self-love, our philautia, and our self-conceit. Now, does this mean you shouldn't love yourself at all? He's not saying that. He's talking about excessive self-love, where we want to think of ourselves better than we are. We want to have self-conceit. We want to, assess ourselves more highly than we deserve. So how can we do that? How can we root that sort of thing out? He actually gives the example of Alexander the Great, who had lots of people kissing his rear end. Alexander said two things moved him to discredit those who proclaimed him a god: his sleeping and his passion for women. If he was a god, he wouldn't need to sleep, and he was pretty horny, right? As a fairly young man who, got his way a lot of the time. And so he could say, oh, you're flattering me. I'm not going to listen to you. So, what does Plutarch suggest that we should do? We should think about where we screw up. We need to know ourselves. We need to follow the Delphic maxim. And what does that mean in real terms? You need to focus on your faults, the ways in which you go wrong, whether it's an action or whether it's like a tendency that you have, and be honest with yourself about it. If you do that, then the flatterer can't get in. Faults of word, what it is that we say, faults of deed, things that we do or don't do that we're supposed to do, and faults of our feelings. It's not enough just to avoid saying or doing the wrong thing. If we feel the wrong way about it, if we find ourselves having to force ourselves to do the right thing, we realize we're not all the way there. And that's good to know about ourselves. So if we actually have a right viewpoint on the kinds of people we are, which is not great people, maybe great in certain respects, but even those we got to be careful. Don't get a swelled head, as we say, because you happen to be good at this one thing over here. Doesn't translate into everything else, even if people are telling you that because they are flatterers. So we need, Plutarch thinks, to be on guard against the flatterers, not just because they're out to get us, but because we have these vulnerabilities within ourselves that have to be paid attention to, identified, and then to some degree, at least as much as we can, remedied so that we can keep ourselves from being injured by the people who will inevitably come along to try to flatter us.